Welcome to a talk about something. I usually come to these seminars with like a little bit of something written out, and I'm trying to think. This is my fourth seminar that we've done at the Philly Bike Expo over the years. And I think I'm always usually have somebody else up here to rely on to be organized. So I do apologize. I'm just relying on myself here. So I went back and forth on what Bina kind of reached out to me last minute, and I was like, oh yeah, I would still like to do something. I got to think of something. And what I keep coming back to, what kind of fascinates me, the discussion that fascinates me most about the bicycle industry as a whole right now, aside from gender and racial inclusivity, would be like what is being marketed to us by the greater bicycle industry. I think this is a safe place to talk about the greater bicycle industry at the Philly Bike Expo because not many of the larger brands are represented here, and this has always been much more of like a grassroots event or billed as one. And I do feel like it still has that feel to it, you know, as opposed to other, I don't know how many people here have been to other like Interbike or some of the other trade shows, right? They could be pretty vapid places. So it's really nice to share a community here in Philadelphia and have it be something, you know, a slight alternative to Interbike. And we all know Interbike isn't really a thing anymore, and I think that's for a strange reason that we can go into in another talk. But this one is all about what is being marketed to us. I'm sure everyone is not, if you haven't caught the gravel bug, you've certainly heard quite a bit about it recently. And I think what's, is everyone privy to the announcement that the UCI will now have a gravel world championships, and all of these larger races like, I'm gonna have to dig into my brain because a few of them have changed their names recently. Unbound, Mid-South. I'm not sure if Mid-South is going to jump on that train, but you know, you have these large gravel events that have been like an alternative to road racing, right? An alternative to other forms of racing that people are jaded by or just want to get out of, and have found real community in these smaller pockets of strange cycling culture. But inevitably, right, that the larger corporations glom on to whatever is cool and try to make you buy a bunch of shit that you don't need afterwards. And so that's how the bicycle industry works. That's how the shops that, especially that are set up in the, they've been set up in the Lance Armstrong era, especially have been kind of structured. So the average person walks into a bike shop. If you've never, especially right now in the bike boom, you're getting a lot of average people that are walking into bike shops, and what are they being sold, right? And so I think of my tenure at bike shops. It was in the early 90s. We were selling the mountain bike culture, you know, mid-90s mountain bike culture. Any raise of hands here if you were alive in the mid-90s and experienced mountain bike culture at its peak. It's a completely different sport than what it is today. Like there's barely even a through line, which is crazy to think. Modern mountain bikes are essentially motorcycles without engines. And in many cases, they're motorcycles with engines because you've got e-bikes that are a whole nother subgenre now that are expected to be the largest moneymaker for all big bike brands moving 10 years into the future, 5 years even. So that's what they're focusing on. Of course, that's a more expensive bike, so you're able to sell more equipment to go along with it. There's a much shorter much shorter service life for something like that. So you've got a lot of extra parts that you need to buy, and you've got special, like the home mechanic is a thing of the past, right? If anybody here has tried to install electronic shifting on your bike, or some of the or internal cable routing, things like that has just become like the norm in modern bicycles because they're just have made them completely complicated in a way that you can't understand what is actually going on inside them. And so I think about somebody stepping into, getting into bicycle culture for the very first time in the pandemic during the bike boom, and what they're encountering, and the hurdles to their permanent engagement in the sport, or if this is going to become a lifestyle, right? Because that's what we really want. We don't want people to just be cyclists, because that's a very one-dimensional way of looking at a lifestyle that is full of so much, as Ari and Sam have just showed us what you can do on a bicycle, right? You know, it's an incredible transformative tool to bring you to all these beautiful places or you could just take it to the grocery store and load up on your groceries and have a beautiful ride home. And, you know, it's just like this thing that unites us, right? The bicycle, the mental health capabilities of it, the beauty that you see, the places it can bring you, and of course the nerd stuff that we really, really like. So I think, well, you know, you're coming into a bike shop for the first time, you're going to be sold Lycra, you're going to be sold a bicycle that may or may not fit you. You're going to be introduced to a sport from, say, like the road or gravel perspective, where, you know, it's very like, you know, you've got to have this certain bike and this certain image of a cyclist that you have in your brain that you need to fit into this tiny little box, and that's not for everyone, right? You know, and I think of where it all came from, and I think of when I was talking before about the through line with mountain bikes, like mountain bikes in the 90s and gravel bikes today are very, very similar. Very similar geometry, very similar, just the wheel size is the only thing that's really changed from 26 to 650B or 700. But, you know, drop bars, they were running that back in the 80s and 90s too. But I wanted to start this whole talk with a video. I was looking around the internet, and has anybody seen any of that old footage of the Pearl Pass tours from the 70s and early 80s? And of course, you've got, I'm sure many people here are well versed in mountain bike history. Like, of course, you have your California stuff, your Colorado stuff, the clunking, all the Gary Fisher and Tom Ritchie and all that stuff that was going on. And I was looking through, and about 10, 15 years ago, I came across this video on YouTube. Right when I was kind of feeling jaded by what I was just talking about, this tiny box that you needed to fit into as a cyclist, as a racer, right? To be in like the highest point of your sport. Like always have loved bicycles, and I've always strived to be the fastest cyclist I could, because that's how I thought you were, you know, the hierarchy of a cyclist was gauged. You know, and I came across these videos, and of course we've moved quite far from this, but at the same time, I almost feel like we're coming back, and I'll start with this one. So it's kind of like, what is the, oh, hello. Well, that's not going full screen, but all right, so say I ask this guy, what is mountain biking? Oh no, come on. This is the first of like 5 videos, so I promise they'll get better after this. Okay, there's no sound. All right. Turn the volume down. What did I do?
You just turned this.
Oh, I turned that? Oh, it's like muted. I promise it's going to be worth it. Oh, wow. Yeah, right. I love that. I love that quote. This guy, right? Like, what the heck? Like, this is a mountain biker. You know, this is somebody. I was listening to a Pink Bike podcast. I like to branch out every once in a while, and I wanted to see, like, I was like, what is the current state of mountain biking today? And after they talked about how terrible all of the bikes were in the 90s and how they've come so far, and about how they couldn't imagine riding even the same geometry. They couldn't even imagine riding a head angle, you know, steeper than 70, you know, and I was thinking, wow, you know, this is really like diverged completely from what I grew up mountain biking being, as more of an adventure, more of an experience. And now it's billed much more as an activity, right? And so an activity is, you've taken away the overall experience, like, oh, we're going to go on our mountain bikes and we're going to go ride out to that hot spring, right? And we're going to have like an all-day adventure, and it's going to be like this cool thing, and that's what we have mountain bikes for. I'm going to go out and, you know, and head out to this farm. Nowadays, it's like, oh, I'm going to head out to this farmer's market and eat a bunch of bread and ride it off on the way home. That's an adventure. You know, so it's very much an experience. You're going out for the day, you've got your bag packed, you know, you've got extra layers, And you know, it becomes much more of a lifestyle that way, right? And you're like, okay, this is I'm going somewhere here. So I'm going to go back again to one of these videos, and so this is again the humble origins of mountain biking. I just kind of took a few clips from that Pearl Pass thing, and again, coming back to this, like there's a lot to learn from what the you know, the original, and I don't know, original mountain bikers, of course, is when you're just riding your bike on your paperboy bike on the dirt road in like the 30s or something. But this is when it was becoming much more counterculture and aligned with the times, and a huge business, a huge groundswell in bicycle marketing and culture came from these humble beginnings. And I find it, you go ahead.
Okay.
Well, they got some hot bikes and some hot shots, but maybe the altitude will get them. It gets mighty thin at 12,000 feet. And it's hard to get that oxygen to the legs, even if you can get it to the lungs.
There you go. You see a lot of the similar styles is what we're emulating today, right? You know, it's all been done before. Now we just have GPS. That's one big upgrade. So we actually know where we're going. So the adventure becomes a little bit less adventurous, but you know, safer and more inclusive for everybody who doesn't quite have the great sense of direction. You see the handlebars are a lot of the same. I wanted to bring up this bike right here. This bike has kind of changed my perspective during the pandemic on what I could do now that I was kind of grounded in New England. If anybody knows any of our past, we've always been kind of on the road, bike touring mostly, looking for terrain like this and getting out and just camping. So now I was like grounded at home in New England. I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Like, where is my experience, right? You know, like I'm not necessarily, like I'll go out for a mountain bike ride here and there just to, when I say mountain bike ride, I'm riding these bikes and I'm going just on my local trails, and a lot of them, they're just hiking trails. And that's how I grew up in southern Connecticut, where you didn't have purpose-built trails or anything like that. It was very, we call it roots rock reggae. And you just, you know, you're just sliding and chunking over the rocks and roots and just trying to find traction somewhere. And if you don't, you just get off and walk. And that's part of the experience, and that's what you're going out there for. And so it was, when I went to college in Durango, it was more of like much more of an activity where you had these purpose-built trails, and you had bikes that were designed just to be ridden on the trails, not necessarily to the trails, right? So that's when you incorporate like your Subaru with your roof rack with all the cars, with all the bikes on top of the roof rack being marketed to you and on the commercials and during the Super Bowl or something, you know. And you're like, oh, okay, so this is what the sport has become now. And the old ways of like what we're seeing here, or riding this sort of bike to the trailhead and just like messing around for a few hours, that's kind of gone by the wayside and been completely forgotten by the larger marketers, which is a cool thing, I suppose. But so this bike right here, as you can see, very similar to these bikes. You've got 26-inch wheels so that when you pick the bike up and you're climbing over rocks and whatnot, you're not knocking into other things. You can get it up nice and high. This aluminum frame actually ended up being pretty cool because it's much easier on the hands when you're picking it up. These fat tubes. All these really selling aluminum now. Nice lightweight bike. This thing weighs like 22 pounds. Yet it's totally cruiser class. You know, it's like a Porsche and a Cadillac in one, and a Land Rover rock crawler. So you know, it's been fun in my mind to kind of build bikes that are purposely built for just going out and encountering anything out there. And in New England, especially in the East Coast, you could connect. If you could see something on a map, you could connect it. You know, the stakes are very low. Exposure, lack of water, like the stuff that you encounter out west, isn't necessarily a thing out here. So I may be wrong in this, but you could take some liberties. You know, you could actually, and that's the other really nice thing about the East Coast is that people generally, as opposed to the West, don't use the trail networks around here. You know, so you have places all to yourselves. Like you could go to these beautiful peaks and say, I'm just going to go up that. I'm going to carry my bike up and I'm going to ride down. And maybe I won't. Maybe I'll ride down just a little bit, but I'm just going to see what's up there. I'm going to bring my bike with me. And oh, you might get in trouble because that's not like entirely legal. There's no sign saying that it isn't, because nobody in their right mind would do such a thing, especially not on the East Coast. So, you know, that's been a nice, fun thing to get into there. A few more videos here. I have one of Gary Fisher. There he is. Everyone's familiar with Gary Fisher, I take it. Or this is what he used to look like. Gosh darn it.
You can hit like 40 miles an hour down some of these hills. So it's totally thrilling, it's total exercise, and it's getting away from the cops, the cars, the concrete, and getting out here. No, nothing is under control. If everything were under control, it would be any fun.
I'm ready, and my stomach's all upset.
Okay, this is the largest group that's ever going to camp on Pearl Pass, I think, so we got to be real careful with nature. Burn toilet paper, don't start the place on fire. Be very careful with the nature.
Yeah.
Careful with the nature.
Even let the Rolling Stones, of course.
So this is, I don't recall which Pearl Pass tour this was, like the third or fourth or fifth, but this is a big thing that they used to do out there, and they still do it to this day. Pearl Pass being like a mountain pass between Crested Butte and Aspen in Colorado. About 10 years ago now, I set out to do it myself. I don't think I ever found the photo, but I was on my Rivendell Sam Hilborn with Bruce Gordon Rockin' Roads in like 700 by 42-ish, and full racks. I'm like, you know, I was like, okay, I saw that video. I'm going to go give this a shot. And I think, I want to say since then, like Jeep traffic and the side-by-side traffics have really torn up that road a little bit, because it was like, it was like boulders like up to here that you're pushing. I think it took me a good 7 hours to push my way up and about 3 hours to push my way back down the other side. I think I pedaled like 3 times during the entire. Again, I wasn't on a perfect bike for it, but you know, it was a mission for sure. So it was really cool to see all of this eclectic group of folks out on these just bicycles that they've either made themselves or kind of put together, kind of like this one, not necessarily listening to any like industry jargon or like, you know, you're not being marketed to other than whatever your friend is running, you know, and you're just like, oh, you know, that might work. You know, it was like a wide open kind of new world for bicycle design, and anything went, you know, and I kind of feel like we're in a similar. Again, we're emulating these looks and styles and kind of learning from things that they were using to get out there into nature and use their bikes to camp off of, or just go on these incredible, you know, day rides that were, you know, just life-altering. And so looking at, you know, where they are now with the small makers that come up and start, you know, becoming Gary Fisher and huger brands like that, or people like, say like Tom Ritchie, who still has, you know, a relatively small component manufacturer and makes great bikes still. So there's like these different levels of success, I suppose, that were reached from this era, but still, you know, like those designs still hold true that they made back then, because it all comes back to this being probably the best bike that I've ever put together for doing the kinds of rides that I like to do, which is I find very ironic. So it's a cool thing. Let me look at my notes here. I think in the 90s, going back to the 90s too, since we're also nostalgic for the 90s, right? I read that, I think I read that somewhere, that this is like the most, we're right now, because of the pandemic and everything that's going on in the world, we're the most nostalgic for the 90s or big bygone eras than we've ever been. And I think that there's something to that. Like, this was a Throughline podcast. Has anyone ever listened to that podcast? I would recommend their nostalgia one. It's very interesting. And it's not necessarily, it's not villainizing nostalgia like I think a lot of, like our previous perceptions of the emotion, if that's what you want to call it, were, but more of like it's comforting in many ways, you know. And I find 90s mountain bike culture to be like the ultimate comfort for me. I still read my back issues of Mountain Bike Action from the mid-90s before I go to bed at night. I saved all of them. And that's what I used to do. I used to read when I was going to bed as a kid. So it's just a really nice feeling for me. So in the 90s, mountain biking was billed as an adventure sport. It would never be called that today. Like I was saying before, it's an activity, like something you drive your car, you drive your full suspension bike with 7 inches of travel front and rear to the trailhead to do your ride, then drive back and take off all your knee pads and elbow pads and full face helmet and go to your desk job or something. I don't know. Sorry if there's any mountain bikers like that in here. I've done that too. I could, except for the desk job part. I would be much more organized for this if I had a desk job. So I had, you know, the bikes of the 90s again with the really small component manufacturers where things really hadn't. It was a real boom, you know, like if you could make a CNC machine to anything, you know, like derailleur pulleys or like end caps, and just make them like purple, you'd sell them, right? Because everyone just wanted like their bikes to be as unique as possible and an extension of their bodies. So it was like this really cool thing that I was getting into of making my bike my own. It was like I grew up in a very small town where I was the only cyclist in the town, and I had a few older guys that I would ride with from a town over that and I ended up working at their bike shop, and they introduced me to a lot of cool shit. And I was just amazed with how you can use the bicycle as a canvas for art, you know, and functional art. And I'm not like an artist with paint or, you know, other like in the traditional sense, but I love the art of the build and everything that you can do to a bicycle to make it your own and to tune it to ride to your certain, I don't know, you know, the type of trails you want to ride or the types of terrain you want to ride or how long you want to ride. And so getting into mountain bikes in the 90s, it was full of that. So as we were moving along, it started to become kind of more of as I started to notice in the kind of mid-90s, it became like front suspension came into play, and then rear suspension came into play, and rear suspension did not work until very recently. I mean, yet everyone pushed it because they knew it was going to work at some point, and there was a lot of money to be made off of it. So whenever I look at bicycles that I'm making for myself, I'm always looking for that first 3-4 years of the 90s before suspension kind of muddled everything, you know, made all the bikes much more complicated. The first RockShox, I think even today, they still leak oil like crazy. So you had a lot of more maintenance that you had to do. As a mechanic, you had to learn how to work on suspension. And that's when I was like, enough, this is not for me. And then I got into road bikes, and that's a whole nother journey. And I'm glad I did, but I'm also glad that I've come back full circle to these types of bikes. So the suspension revolution, so a bunch of motocross trickle down, higher costs, more replacement, disposable bikes, and manicured purpose-built trails. That's modern mountain biking. Again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, but I'm just saying that there's an alternative to that if we think back to what has already happened. So, in tying into modern gravel, we're kind of at that same impasse again where there's been a bunch of, like I was saying before, the UCI, the governing body for professional cycling, is now bringing gravel racing into their folds. And so it's about to become even more roadified. And it's been interesting to see there's a lot of say like Ted King, for example, a lot of our, like our domestic pros from back, 10 years ago that didn't necessarily find all that much success in professional road racing, yet he was able to, after his retirement, come in and just dominate the gravel scene. And that kind of spawned off the roadification of gravel, and now I know there was a lot of hubbub about Unbound this past year, and like bringing in all of these professional teams that use professional road racing tactics. And I'm like, wow, yeah, of course that's going to happen, because you're like, wow, you know, gravel racing and gravel riding has had such a big boom because it gets people off of the road. Like, there's so many positives. It gets people off of busy roads. It gets people out into nature where they can enjoy it if they choose to, or they could just hammer right through it if they're training for a race or something like that. But still, you know, you're away from cars and traffic, and that's attractive to every one of us as cyclists, right? Because, you know, especially if you live in a city. And so getting out there, all positive things, but when you bring in hardcore racing, right? Like, what does that do to a sport? Does it change it irreversibly? Is it just going the life cycle of the bicycle industry's capitalist agenda? Like, you know, is this just going to get cycled through as another fad? Well, you know, that's yet to be seen. But what can we do as an alternative if that's something that we've been into but yet don't like the direction that it's going? What if we have grown up, or not, or in some cases grown up, or in our adult lives have found great connections at these events and races? Like, what comes after that if that's not our scene anymore, right? And I was just thinking, I'm like, well, what can't you roadify? And that's the hike-a-bike. You cannot roadify the hike-a-bike. You can't draft when you're hiking up a mountain with your bike on your shoulder. And I was just trying to think of more and more. Even in mountain bike racing, you have certain dirt road sections where you could still implement road racing tactics with drafting. And again, that's fun. There's a place for that. But there's always going to be there's always going to be something out there that you want to do, right? You know, like an event or like an experience. I don't want to, adventure may be too much of like a catchy term, like an experience. We're looking for that cycling experience, for a lifestyle experience. And I'm thinking, well, you know, what if we start doing these strange events where it's more all-terrain bicycling, which is what mountain biking was called in the beginning, ATB, instead of MTB, because we're not all living in mountains, right? So, you know, what if we just were able to look at these places on the maps and say, I want to go there. Well, let's get a bunch of people together and go out there, right? And wouldn't that be fun? It's exactly what they were doing already. So that just has my mind, just has my attention right now. And we've just, I'm sure, how many of y'all were at the Nutmeg Nor'easter this past few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago? And that's kind of like what I'm kind of like trying to figure out with the Nutmeg Nor'easter. Like, how can we have these cool routes that get people out there for the experience and not necessarily completely dissuade people from racing, but not encourage it, and have it still be like a community event where people can get together and understand that you don't have to, like, you're not judged as a cyclist by how fast you are. It's not, that's not what it's all about. It's about how good you do the experience, right? And so it's been an interesting journey in my cycling sphere, and I hope some other of you have found that also. I have a bunch of photos that I had of people hiking up mountains in the past year since I've gotten back to New England. So I'll do a little slideshow now, and then we'll have a little Q&A. How's that sound? All right, not everyone at once. All right. Okay, we're going to start with, Aria. This is this was in Switzerland. This was a few years ago. I think this was Aria's like first heavy-handed introduction to bike hiking. That's her right there. Yep, that's her again. She's smiling. This is when I knew, this is right there. This is when I knew that she was the one. You know? Yeah, you know, you got to, this was one of the first tours that we did. This was over, after doing Pearl Pass for the first time, I decided that I brought her back a few years later, and I decided that, I was like, oh, you know, there's Star Pass is another way over, I think it's called Star Pass, is another way over that mountain range, and it was equally as This is one of the nicer paths. It was equally as unrideable. I don't think it ever quite ended, yeah. This is already at the top of Engineer Pass. This is probably 6 years ago. This was her first big mountain pass, and she was like, she just got it done. Like, I think maybe we had done our first bike tour together a year prior to this, and we had just taken a train to Richmond and ridden, you know, like 40 miles into Virginia, and that took like 2-3 days. And a year later, she was already doing this. And getting on top of that mountain and seeing everything around you, and just knowing that you can stay up there for as long as you want because you got a bunch of layers and food and everything, or you can camp up there if you wanted to. That wouldn't have been a smart idea. And you just descend right back down. Just a really cool experience. That's going down. There she is going up, one of the few rideable sections. Yeah, there. Yeah, that's on there. Oh yeah, this is their first. This is the first. Going back 10 years, this was like the origins of the Hot Bod Rando Boys Rando Club. If anyone had the T-shirts back in the day, that's me, 15 years ago. All right. There's Joe Cruz pumping up a tire that's not an Ultra Dynamico. These are some of the descents that you encounter going down some of the mountains in New England. Nice and chunky. You'd be so surprised if you just lean all the way back what you can ride down, you know, because it's slow. You're just rock crawling, you know. It's like problem solving as you're going down. I feel like speed is so much sexier. So you have like a photo shoot at West or something. You've got like a guy like going around a berm all manicured, like dragging their handlebar on the ground, and like that's the shot, which is a really cool shot, don't get me wrong, but there's something really cool about low speed, really, really low speed, like 2-3 miles an hour going downhill. That's so New England, right? There's Joe walking up. This was Mount Equinox. So, you know, it's a little, not for everyone. Oh yeah, you know, it's general stuff that you do out there. You know, you're just connecting stuff on the maps. Like, rideability isn't a factor. You're just trying to get somewhere, and if you could ride it, that's great. If you have to walk it, that's fine too. This is why we wear sandals, though. This is the top. This is the highest point in Connecticut. We started. Joe and a few of my other friends started getting together this past year to kind of figure out like some like high points in all of the New England states to see if we could ride our bikes up there. You don't ride your bikes up there. You carry your bike up there and carry it back down, but you might ride a little bit. That's the highest point in Connecticut, which is my home state. This was like a really, really fun trip. Yep, more walking. Let me get into some more here. I'm going to end with this trip that I did over the summer with Taylor Finney. Does everyone know who Taylor Finney is? He was like our next great hope he's Davis Finney's son, if anyone watched road racing in the 80s and 80s. When did he stop racing, Bruce? You know this?
When did
Davis Finney? Yeah. Yeah, long ass time ago. Anyway, he was a professional road racer for a number of years, and he's kind of like in the same. This is Taylor right now, in the same kind of spot. It was like, well, what do I do after? Let's post gravel or post road racing. Like I'm jaded from bike racing. What can I do, you know, to keep me engaged in bicycles and the bicycle community? What still feels good? And so we have a kindred soul here. We've been doing a lot of weird things like this, climbing up. This was in Colorado. That was going down. Some serious chunk. But it was so fun. And then you get up there and you see that and you're like, holy shit, I'm up here on my bike. What the hell? I had started hiking 14ers. I went to college in Colorado and I started doing 14ers, and like you get up to the top and you're like, oh yeah. And we got to walk down. It's like the worst. It takes forever and it kills your knees. And it's just like, some people like it, I'm sure, but I hate it. So I stopped doing 14ers, and this was like my first time up with my bike. And being able to get up there, we did 3 of them in this ring, and then just be able to push along. We were at 14,000 feet because we did 3 peaks like in this basin. So we were up there for like 4 hours above 14,000 feet, and we were tripping balls. Like it was just like, like I didn't know what. Look at me, I don't know what's going on. But yeah, the stuff that you see up there isn't only great for Instagram fodder, but it's a really good experience too. And of course, you encounter a little bit of snow. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Rough Stuff Fellowship. All of those, I would highly recommend looking up their Instagram because or I'm sure they have a website and they have a bunch of books, but it's just some really old footage from the 60s in England of an eclectic group of all different ages and gender of people just, I don't think there's a single photo of them actually riding their bikes, right? It's all it's all just these these 1960s like Raleighs with really skinny tires and carrot ice bags, just doing stuff like this. Going down, pushing up. We already saw that. And that's how I'm going to end it. I liked that photo. So that's the end of my journey from mountain bike racer in the 90s to road racer, and then to gravel curious, and back to ATB. Any questions?
Is that one of your custom bent bars?
These right here, these particular bars, I mean, there's tons of shapes like this that you could probably get for $5 out of the Wald catalog. But I wanted something lighter and more high performance, made out of a better aluminum. So I took the Rivendell Bosco bars about 2 years ago, right when I was, again, when the pandemic, and during the pandemic, us being grounded was something that hadn't happened in 20 years for me. And so just kind of fiddling around in my garage, keeping my mind busy became like a big hobby. And bending handlebars was probably, I still to this day, I bend a few bars per week. It's just a real nice exercise. But I had bent out some Rivendell Bosco bars because I wanted to try like a more of an upright, like cruiser position. And I ended up really liking them. And so I got Matt from Crust to I had Adam Sklar drew them up for me. Then I had Matt make them in Taiwan. So hopefully we'll have those in a, see, now I'm marketing to you. Hopefully we have those in a few months. But yeah, those are the actual bars. Those aren't the bent ones. Anyone else?
So yeah, talk more about like this like alt commodification. We're still buying stuff, we're still consuming stuff.
Yeah,
we're still
yeah.
buying crap, continuously looking for that shiny thing to buy,
Mhm,
add on
mhm.
something. Like,
Yeah.
or even like traveling, like instead of just like biking from your house, you fly out to some crazy mountain range and bike that.
Totally.
How do you like quantify that and like wrangle with that
The
mentality?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're buying things more than ever right now. If we can buy, if something's available, right, we'll buy it. I keep see all these headlines that we have all of this extra money and nothing to buy. I don't know how true that actually is for people in this room, but yeah, that's what I hear in the headlines. Anyway, so we're being pushed to be more. This is like late stage capitalism, as everyone keeps saying. Who knows how long late stage capitalism lasts? But we are being pushed ever so, I mean, with social media even more so than ever, because you have these larger, I mean, you have really large brands glomming onto and buying up cool, and then feeding it back to you in like an ad that you don't even realize is an ad because you're scrolling. It's fucked up. It's really messed up. And so I think that there is like the midway point in there is, of course, like mindful consumerism, where you're like, okay, like stop for a second, like the attention economy, like be mindful of that, like what is happening, like as long as you know and are aware of what's happening to you when these things pop up on your screen, and you're able to divorce yourself from that reality and be like, okay, this is what's happening. Is this something that I really need? Is this a place that I really need to go? I'm not going to react here. I'm going to think about it first. And this is what they don't want you to do, is think about it first, right? They just want you to be like, oh, I've got to have that, got to have that, got to have that, more. And when I think of what, I should have made a graph for this, but this was, there's two different investment firms. I may be getting the specifics wrong with this, but there's two different investment firms. One's called, I'm not even going to say the names of the investment firms since I can't remember them, but one's essentially owned by Specialized and one's essentially owned by Lance Armstrong. And so these are like in the shadows where no one's really thinking about it because they're maybe 3 or 4 steps removed from the product. And so these investment firms come together to form the huge media conglomerate of Outside Media. Most people know Outside Media as like Outside Magazine. Well, Outside Magazine owns, they were most recently in the news for becoming this huge conglomerate, but also buying up Pink Bike, Velo News, Bicycle Retailer, Peloton. I could go on and on and on of all the websites and all of the, basically everything that a cyclist who, I don't know if this applies to everyone in here, but the stuff that a cyclist looks at on the internet and the news sources that they rely on for unbiased testing of a product are all owned by the entities that are being advertised and sold within this like subgenre of media conglomerates. And so you have Specialized and Lance Armstrong owning the entire, I should put up a link or something in our website to kind of show this because it really blew my mind that they are owning the cycling experience from beginning to end, like the lowest end to the highest end, and all of the media in between are owned by those companies. And so how they market to you is very devious but it's like seemingly okay in this late stage capitalism because we've normalized it so much. And so again, this is a Specialized, right? And so I find it really, really fun that this is what it, that this is what, this is 1992. And of course they were marketing quite a bit in 1992, but you like had to pick up a magazine and like find it in a magazine off the shelf in like a grocery store or something. Like you were so far removed from the actual media, whereas now we just have to turn on our phones and it's right in front of our faces. And so again, going back to nostalgia, I'm really nostalgic for this era where you had to like really look for things. And it was like harder to buy things because they were made by smaller manufacturers that didn't always have the things that you were looking for. So you kind of had to wait and like, oh, I really want that, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Like I want to buy once and buy right, and I'm not going to buy this like carbon super bike because I know it has a service life, and in 3 years I'm going to have to throw it away and it's going to be put in the landfill somewhere. And oh, this electronic shifting, I'm going to have to keep on buying batteries and batteries and batteries, and where are these batteries coming from, or my e-bike, where's my batteries coming from? And just thinking about these things, being mindful. And I think that that's kind of the tightrope in between. I don't know if I answered your question. That was a pretty long answer, but all right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's something about used parts too for me that's not necessarily, like I would still use them even if they weren't used. Like these are the parts that work. Like these are generally when Shimano was still all made in Japan, when Sugino was all made in Japan, or it still is, but when you could buy like a full group set that was like really high quality, rebuildable, built to last 10, 15, 20 years even. And you can't get parts like that anymore unless you buy it from a small boutique brand like Paul or something like, or Chris King or something like that. But even so, it's incredible how they've tried to make bicycles such a simple machine at its core, right? And it's like an upgrade to the human body. Like we need to be connected with it in more than just like, oh, this is my bike. Like you should know how it works, especially if you're going to go out on an adventure experience like that. A lot can go wrong. And so when you're keeping that in mind and building a bike, geared to that sort of activity or experience, then there's some really cool old stuff that you can get into and just buy off eBay, and it's going to be better than anything you can get today. And so that's how you kind of circumnavigate the consumerism altogether. But again, even if they were new, I'd buy it because the stuff's just the best. Anyone else?
You're fitting in like the new wave of gravel technology or whatever. Is there anything that you see that might be useful for keeping it more accessible for people, like getting people into it as opposed to just marketing bullshit? Like anything that's coming out that's going to be so here?
Yeah, you know, the marketing via gravel cycling is you know, if it's the other edge of the sword, whereas we were all marketing for road bikes, you know, prior to this, like that was the hot thing. It's certainly a much more versatile and usable bike than a road bike overall. You know, you could use it for a lot more. The wider tires, bigger clearances and stuff like that are going to make it relevant for a lot longer. So when I think of, yeah, I can't think of anything in particular, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. Like, it's not all bad. It's a step in the right direction, and I think if people are fit on gravel bikes as opposed to road bikes, when you're coming into a bike shop, again, when this stuff is available again, I don't know what's going on with that. That's a whole nother story. But yeah, if that's the bike that you get, that's a really usable, versatile bike that you could do a lot on, as opposed to being just thrown into, you know, the superhero suit and the spandex and out the door with your road bike that you're, you know, like fit like this on, and your back hurts, and you try it once and your kids make fun of you and you put it away the next day or something, right? So it's a step in the right direction, but yeah, I can't think of anything specifically. Anyone else? Yeah?
Let's talk about like, the rapidly changing standards on bikes. I missed the first part of your.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like I'm from about 5 years before you racing on bikes in the late 80s.
Mm.
I still have a lot of my bikes from the 90s, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep them up. I'm buying on eBay all the time. And I don't mind, you know, changing standards, but I just see a lot of the current stuff. It doesn't yield much.
Yeah.
Results. I mean,
Exactly right.
The pros, I don't know, you know, what they're getting out of it.
Yeah.
And is there any way that we as consumers can slow it down, or you know, go a different direction, or?
Yeah, I think absolutely. You know, what I love about some other, I mean, I don't know why, but you could still buy square taper bottom brackets, new. Like, they're still being made, which is amazing, right? That's like compact discs still being made or something, or more cassette tapes still being made, which they are, you know, because they're useful. They're like a standard that is here to last, like it's stood the test of time. And so I love bottom bracket standards. Get me the most heat under my, I don't know what. Tiny shorts, yeah, the real. Yeah, the boost, super boost. I mean, you could go on, and it's like I said, mindful consumerism. Like, think about that. Like, think about all those standards, and think about, do they really need to be implemented? And the answer always is no. Like, we've got the bicycle as it sits right now has stood pretty much unchanged for decades. And there's for a reason there, because you don't really need to do much more to it. But again, that doesn't make the bigger brands any money. And so you've constantly, with the, you know, under the flag of improvements and pushing forward and making the bicycle better and better and better, we've kind of lost sight of what made it so good in the first place, and that's simplicity, right? You know, it's a simple way to get around, and it's accessible to people, and for people to understand how to use it and work on their own bikes in their garages. And the square taper bottom bracket, I don't own a bike without a square taper bottom bracket. I hate outboard bearings. They suck. They're terrible. They don't last long. They're made to be replaced like every season. It's ugly, ugly, terrible looking. I'm going to stop. If I see outboard bearings on a bike, I'm just like, this is not for me. And so, you know, the square taper bottom bracket has always worked, and it's always worked great. And yet I think we're on maybe like the 10th or 15th standard since the square taper bottom bracket was abandoned by Shimano in, I guess, during the Octolink era in the late 90s. The Octolink era is something to stay away from if you're buying parts on eBay. That was not a great push. And the same thing with shifting. There's all these different ways of shifting, and I guess I have friends that, like my business partner for Ultra Dynamico, swears by his electronic shifting, and maybe that's why we're able to have such a well-balanced product line, because I'm way into more analog stuff and he's way more into like tech stuff. And he loves shifting with his buttons, and I love feeling every shift. You know, it just feels good to me to know what I'm getting into, and knowing that if I start misshifting, all I've got to do is like fiddle around with the screw on my handlebar and it starts working again, you know? And so, you know, it's all about what I guess it's all about what you plan on using the bike for, but do we really need like 150 millimeter axle spacing in the rear, or like to fit, you know, 50 gears in the rear, 50 tooth chainring, when you could just not abandon your front derailleur? I know the front derailleur is, you know, it's, front derailleurs are very contentious. But, you know, yeah, I'm all about doing super low gearing, but I don't like the look or the price of a huge cassette in the rear, like a pie plate. And so I'll put my 22 tooth bailout gear with this one. I think it's like a 38 bigger chainring, a 22 tooth bailout gear, and I'm able to just sit down and relax in that low gear, which is even lower than like eagle gearing, but I didn't need to spend $2,000 achieving that. It's about $15. So yeah, there's all these workarounds, and and if you're looking for workarounds, Sheldon Brown, if you go on harriscyclery.com, just look Sheldon Brown up on the internet, and he will tell you, yes, I'm not Catholic, but something like that. Everything I know, I learned from Sheldon Brown. That's basically a rule for me. So if you're looking for compatibility or like to nerd out on any of this kind of like applying old school technology to modern solutions, then look at Sheldon Brown. And he's not with us anymore, unfortunately, but he was a genius. And he's got all of his old websites from the 90s that certainly look like they were made in the 90s. They have not been upgraded. But it's like, again, harkening back to that nostalgic era. It's really fun to spend a Friday or Saturday night doing that. Anyone else? Mario?
So going back to the front derailleurs.
Uh-huh.
How do you get a front derailleur to work with the 3822? Because they're all meant for bigger rings, and I have problems with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of trial and error, which is great because front derailleurs, no one wants them. They cost nothing. And so I have a collection that I have. I go around to bike co-ops and a lot of stuff on eBay, and I'm just looking for like front derailleurs, and some work and some don't. And there's very little rhyme or reason to why some work and some don't. But when you're using friction, generally you can get all of them to work to an extent. Now I think what you're talking about, you're looking for like a wide range double. You kind of need like there's a catch term Alpine, which was Shimano did the XT Alpine and like a few other ones, and I think that was kind of like they referred to like a wide range double as like Alpine gearing in the 80s and early 90s. And so if you do like that kind of search term, you could often find something that has like a drop cage. You got something to add here, Bruce?
Yeah, if you really want big derailleurs that will shift almost anything. 90 to 94, so before they went to the compact cranks, that era, Shimano, LX, DX, XT, I've run XTs with a setup 24, 40, 54, just beautifully, and I routinely run 24, 34, 46, just beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Get a hold of some older road derailleurs to the rear, like say Ultegra 8, 9 feet rails. They work with, say, a 1228 cassette and a triple, beautifully.
There you go. See it.
The stuff's out there. I mean,
It's
I
out
have a
there.
collection. I was in the business.
For everyone here, yeah.
Every time something new came out, our distributors were blowing out everything. So you could, we were lucky. We were able to, get on closeout some of the stuff we're still using.
It's a fun fact.
Like we have a nonprofit. We have a wealth of front derailleurs.
Oh, now you're getting me excited, Bruce. That's good. It's a fun fact. Bruce owned the bike shop that I bought my first mountain bike at. He worked there. You don't own it yet. He didn't own it yet, but in 1993, I bought a Diamondback Topanga. It was way too big for me, and I ended up racking my undercarriage on the top tube, and I've had 3 surgeries since. But that's another story altogether. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of like nerding out you could do on just the front derailleur alone, and it's fun just to see how it works because you know I'm sure you've seen some of the older front derailleurs, which is just a lever down here. And it's like a suicide lever, and those are really cool, and they work. And I've seen them work great, and I've seen them work terribly. But it's all about like these little things that you can actually, if you've got a mechanical mind or just a little bit inclined to learn these sorts of things, you could see them working. You know, and it's like a fun little exercise just to have it up in the stand and see what your little adjustments do to make your shifting work or not work, or like really piss off your friends on a group ride because you've got the front derailleur and it's dropping the chain every time, but that's all part of it. We're not out here to race. We're out here to drop our chains and, oh, this is just another, take a smoke break, yeah. I'll get that back on. We started us off, we got to go friction. Anyone else?
I had just a quick comment on, I totally agree that those 90 to 94 and the XT is my favorite.
Yeah.
You can also shape it, you can hand shape it.
That's right, that's right,
You
yeah.
can open the front of it a little bit and then curve it where it's mounted so that the back of the front derailleur is closer to the rear
Yeah.
car, just slightly. And you can get a lot of more utility out of it.
Right, right. Yeah, you all had no idea the front derailleur can be such a badge of honor. Yeah,
Don't be afraid to bend it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to bend it. There's plenty more out there. Yeah. Anyone else? Where?
You ever get into heat riding in places you shouldn't be riding?
The East Coast, like that's like a really, again, it's like I'm better at, I'm a white man, I'm tall, and I have long hair. That's like the only thing that I think people would say like, oh, get out of here for. So I do take a lot of liberty. I will admit, over my career, I've taken a lot of liberties with that. And I think that's a huge factor in why I have been able to talk my way out of most private property scuffles. I've had a gun pulled on me before. That's the furthest that it's gone. But that was it's all out in California. I find on the East Coast, things are just way more chill. And that's something that we really have going for us here. It's really sexy to look at stuff from out west and be like, whoa, man, look at the stuff they got out there. Like, you could just go up any mountain and this, that, and that. But, you know, it's not like that. Like, it's, you know, these places out west are where people are way more into outdoor recreation. They do get they get busy. And if you're out there and you're trying to do something that doesn't fit into their box of what you're allowed to do, you will get in trouble. And again, there's a lot of trail erosion issues and things like that out there too. I find that when you're riding bikes like this, people tend to feel like hikers and they tend to just feel bad for you. And they don't see you as a threat. But when you're coming down a mountain with like a full face helmet on and all these pads on a bike that looks like a motorcycle, yeah, you're gonna have problems, you know, and you should have problems because you just shouldn't be out there on a bike like that, you know. It's dangerous. It automatically means that you're going much more than 3-4 miles an hour and you could seriously injure somebody. And that being said, I just have not encountered, when I go out on these trips out on the East Coast, I just don't see anybody. There's no one out there. So I've never had issues with that. Again, I would do a little bit of research before you plan a trip like that, and I like to look at Strava heat maps and see. I love Strava, by the way. That's something about technology and capital. I don't know if Strava is I'm sure it'll be like bought up by some bike brand at some point, and it'll be like this big, huge thing, bigger than it already is. But it's like a great like community tool to see who else is riding in these areas, and if you can meet up and like they might be able to show you something, or you could see the tracks that they've done. And I found it a great resource to meet people out there that are like-minded and be like, oh, you did that route too? Holy shit, we should meet up someday. And so that's been really cool. So I'll look at Strava heat maps to see if people have gone close to these mountains on bikes, or you know, and then I'll like switch it over to hiking or running and see like where the hikers and runners have gone. And I'm not necessarily riding my bikes in these places. Again, I'm hiking too. I'm just carrying my bike. So it's not like the rules that you have like on the Arizona Trail crossing the Grand Canyon, where your tires can't even touch the ground. You have to like put them on your back and everything like that. Like they have to be that strict out there. Whereas on the East Coast, you can, if you're just walking by, rolling your bike, like no one's going to say, because you're just out there enjoying the day like they are, and it's not like you're like a RoboCop coming to dominate their mountain. Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today. And yeah, thank you. Hope you have a good rest of your time here at the Bike Expo.